Democracy Medal Ceremony and Lecture. I'm Michael Berkman, Professor of Political Science and Director of the McCourtney Institute for Democracy. It is good to see you, and welcome back to campus so many of our alumni board of visitors and friends. We did this event virtually last year, but I'm so pleased that we could come together in person to honor the winner of the 2021 Brown Democracy Medal. A little background about the McCourtney Institute for Democracy for those of you here for the first time. Founded in 2012 and originally called the Democracy Institute, we took on our current name in 2014 when longtime benefactors Tracy and Ted McCourtney made a transformational gift which ensured the future of the Institute. Since then, Tracy and Ted have made additional gifts to help us fulfill our vision. They created an endowment for a civil discourse initiative and made another gift that we're using to enhance our Mood of the Nation poll. The McCourtneys are generous across the College of the Liberal Arts, perhaps most notably for creating a matching program encouraging others to establish endowed professorships in the college. Larry Brown, who serves as chair of our Board of Visitors, along with his wife Lynn, took advantage of the McCourtney match to create the Brown-McCourtney Early Career Professorship. Ray Block, an associate professor of political science and African American studies, who's here with us today. Ray, why don't you just wait? Who's here with us today is its most recent recipient. Ray's research into racial, ethnic, and gender differences in civic involvement, social identity, and political arenas is timely and important for better understanding our democracy. We're delighted by his appointment, especially since it means he'll be working closely with the McCourtney Institute. As most of you are aware, Larry and Lynn Brown are also the benefactors behind the Brown Democracy Medal, our reason for today's ceremony. Passionate about preserving our democracy and recognizing those who work for democratic causes around the world, the Browns created this award to recognize thought leaders and organizations who stand out for their work to promote and sustain democracy. Just as the McCourtney Institute supports meaningful scholarship and practical innovations to advance democracy in the United States and abroad, the Brown Democracy Medal brings attention to new domestic or international ideas and innovations, giving those who promote them the public recognition they deserve and thereby accelerating their positive impact. The Brown Democracy Ceremony has become one of our signature events. Award winners prepare an essay, which is published by Cornell University Press, present this lecture at our annual ceremony, record an episode of our podcast, and receive an honorarium as well as a commemorative medal. The beautiful medal was designed by Charlie Cunningham, who earned his Master of Fine Arts degree with a focus on sculpture from Penn State's College of Arts and Architecture in 2015. And with that, I'll turn the program over to Larry to present the 2021 Brown Democracy Medal. Larry?
Thanks, Michael, and welcome everyone. So great to be back here at Penn State and see everybody in person. Lynn and I created the Brown Medal, which was the brainchild of Dean Welsh, John Gastel, and the Democracy Institute folks, to recognize outstanding individuals, groups, and organizations that produce exceptional innovations to further democracy in the United States and around the world. Winners have come from the US, like today's honoree, but also from Ireland and Serbia. Applications for the award have come from all corners of the globe. Ironically, one of the reasons the medal was created was to recognize the importance of vital work that is flying under the radar. But there's no flying under the radar for this year's winner. He has done just fine on his own. Desmond Meade, the 2021 Brown Democracy Medal winner, is a truly amazing success story. He had some serious bumps along the road, but reinvented himself to become a nationally recognized champion for voting rights and justice. Born in St. Croix, Desmond Meade moved to Miami with his parents when he was just 5. He graduated from high school and joined the Army, where he developed a drug habit that led to years of drug abuse and some actions which landed him in prison. Upon his release from prison in 2005, having difficulty rejoining society in a meaningful way because of the roadblocks returning inmates often face, Desmond made the decision to turn his life around. He entered a drug treatment program and eventually graduated from college and then law school. Unfortunately, his felony conviction meant he could not sit for the Florida bar exam, or even serve on a jury, or run for office, or vote. Like more than 1 million similarly situated Floridians, Desmond no longer had the right to vote in local, state, or federal elections. What did he do? He became a champion for voting rights, perhaps the most sacrosanct right a citizen living in a democratic society has. Today, he is executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition and chair of Floridians for a Fair Democracy. Through these organizations, Desmond and his team built a broad, bipartisan coalition to pass Florida Amendment 4, which restored voting rights to the more than 1.4 million Floridians with previous felony convictions. In a time of rampant partisanship, Amendment 4 passed in 2018 with 65% of the vote. Desmond has testified before Congress, the United Nations, has appeared on countless television and radio broadcasts, and was named in 2019 by Time magazine as one of the most influential people in the world. Other accolades: he was named a game changer by Politic 365 and a 2021 MacArthur Fellow, a singularly prestigious honor. And just a few weeks ago, Desmond received long hoped for news, finally receiving clemency from the state of Florida, which now makes him eligible to join the Florida bar, run for office, and serve on juries. Desmond Meade is living proof that second chances pay off, and he has fought selflessly and tirelessly to advocate for second chances, even when his own second chance was denied. Today, he is an inspiring example of what a second chance can mean to a person, to a community, and to an entire population. And that's why Desmond Meade is the recipient of the 2021 Brown Democracy Medal. Congratulations. So while he's coming up here, I'm going to show you the medal. It says on the back, the 2021 Lawrence and Lynn Brown Democracy Medal presented to Desmond Meade with the date today. Where are you? Congratulations. Congratulations. Well done. Go ahead. I'm getting out of your way. I don't want you breaking the medal, okay? I'm going to take it with me.
Good evening. Oh, we have to try that again. Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, definitely want to thank the Browns, McCourtney Institute for Democracy, faculty, staff, administrators. Special shout out to Professor Chris Bean and Jenna for this honor. You know, Larry, I just figured out that we have something in common. We're both men who are wise enough, men who come from outside the state and are avid, I would say, sports fans, that we were wise enough to change our teams and become supporters of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania teams and make sure that we denounce our old teams like the Giants or the Dolphins or even the Cowboys. And so I'm a proud Philadelphia Eagle fan. And like I told, I think it was Larry, we was talking, and I told him I'm praying that my presence here would bring an aura and a level of electricity that would allow Penn State to upset Michigan this weekend, right? You know, and when I was looking at this book again, and it's talking about America's disenfranchised and why restoring the vote of people with previous felony convictions, how it could save the soul of democracy, and it seems like a far stretch. And I was wondering if people would be able to actually connect the dots. And so I want to at least try to do so tonight, and to talk about, Mr. Brown, he talked a lot about my history, but I want to hone in on a few parts of it. I think that is so pertinent to the discussion. In August of 2005, I was standing in front of railroad tracks, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. That day, I stood there. I was a very broken man. I was homeless. I was addicted to crack cocaine. I was unemployed. I was recently released from prison. And the only thing I owned were the clothes that was on my back. And as I stood there, I realized that my parents did not raise me to be in that position, but there I was. I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, and I was ready, willing, and able. I was ready to make that move. I was ready just to end it all. And that was a very low point for me. I remember standing there even thinking about, how much pain I was going to feel when that train ran over my body, whether I was going to die instantly or, have to suffer through some moments of pain. And I tell folks all the time, listen, I'm scared of needles, right? I hate pain, but even the thought of that pain crushing my body and the pain that I would have to endure with that, was not enough to make me move, and I stood there and I waited and I waited. But God had other plans, and that train didn't come, and I ended up crossing those tracks, and I checked myself into a drug treatment facility, and after 4 months of in-house treatment, I was able to successfully complete that, and I moved into a homeless shelter. And of course, the story. While at the homeless shelter, I enrolled in a local community college and was able to do real well to eventually get accepted into law school, and in May of 2014, graduating with a law degree. But the moment that I think is so pertinent to even this discussion and the discussion about democracy was a moment, one of them was when I crossed those tracks, and I stopped immediately and I asked myself a very important question. It was simple. Desmond, if you were to have died, how many people would come to your funeral? And the answer was 0. Nobody would have came because I was homeless. I didn't hang around friends or family because I was ashamed of the condition I was in. And so I would have been buried in a pauper's grave. And I didn't like that feeling. It was so empty. And so I changed the fact pattern, and I said, okay, Desmond, the train kills you, and they're going to have your picture on the front page, top of the fold of the most popular newspaper in Dade County. Bold headlines, Desmond killed by train. How many people would come to your funeral? And after thinking long and hard, I only came up with 4 people, and maybe out of the 4, 2 would have shed a tear. And that thought itself also caused me to just feel a sense of emptiness. And I questioned my existence, and I asked, Desmond, after all these years of living on this planet, you mean to tell me that only 4 people would care if you died? Have your life been that insignificant? And I remember taking that feeling, that empty feeling, with me in the drug treatment, and not too long after being there, Rosa Parks passed away. And I remember one day sitting in a room by myself, and I was looking at the television, and they were showing how, they had her body lay in state in the rotunda of the Capitol. And they were catching images of people that were paying their last respects, and many of them had tears flowing down their cheeks. And I remember something hitting me just like a bolt of lightning out of nowhere, and I jumped out of my chair, and I was like, that's it. I started pointing at the TV. I was like, yes, that's it. That's what I want. Right? My mind started racing, and I was planning my own funeral. And I'm trying to figure where am I going to have it, and I finally landed on Dolphin Stadium. It's amazing because it's amazing because the image that I had in my head was almost identical to what we seen at the memorial service for Kobe and Gigi Bryant. The only difference is I wanted mine in the football stadium, standing room only. I even wanted chairs on the field, not one dry eye in the house. And then I started thinking about, I had a big problem. I have the venue, but what type of person could command an audience to fill that venue? And I only came up with a movie star or an athlete. Now, I can tell you that, I played a little football in high school, and I thought I was good. But, I had bad knees at the time, even though the Dolphins still probably could have used me. Don't laugh too hard. The Eagles can use me now, too. But I ruled that out, and I only thought about a movie star. And unfortunately, at the time, when I think of movie star, the only name that pops in my head is Denzel Washington. And, my wife tells me I'm a handsome guy, but I didn't think I was a Denzel Washington type of handsome. And, I tell folks today, and I get in trouble when I say this, my wife definitely gets mad at me, but I tell folks that thank God I didn't think of Forrest Whitaker at the time, because I knew I had him beat. And maybe I would have pursued a career in the movie business. But I didn't think of Forrest Whitaker or even Wesley Snipes. I could beat him too, Dean, right? As long as I don't show the abs, because he got real good abs. But I thought that, man, I can't even be Denzel. And so I got depressed for a minute. But then my mind went back to Rosa Parks, that she committed an act. She did something that had a positive impact in people's lives. And that was very important for me, because what it did, it allowed me to think about taking all of that pain and that suffering, that low self-esteem that led me to those tracks, and use it in such a way to help others so they wouldn't have to go to those railroad tracks. So that was a significant moment for me, because I knew that, man, I could do that. I can do that. I didn't know how. Right? And the Dolphin Stadium holds a lot of people. I didn't know what to do or where to start, but I knew I had to get it done. And that second act was when I interacted with a young man that was in drug treatment with me. And after a session, he approached me and told me that it was something that I said to cause him to experience a paradigm shift, to cause him to have hope. And I remember when he told me that, something erupted inside of me that I never, ever felt in my life before. Today, I can tell you that I felt a joy that I never knew existed. I felt a joy that I was chasing all of my life. Could you imagine chasing for something that you didn't even know existed? And today, I know that that joy was me discovering my purpose, what God had placed me on this planet for. And I realized that in spite of whatever title I may or may not have, what award I may or may not receive, that I was always in a position to help someone else, that there was always someone else less fortunate. And those two things really set the foundation to where when I was still in treatment and I would get on my knees to pray, that I would not be praying for the nice house or the career or the wife. I wasn't praying for those things. What I was praying for when I was on my knees in treatment was each and every one of you. Without even knowing you. Because I was praying for God to give me the stamina, the strength, the endurance, the wisdom, and the discernment to continue to do his work. And which was to make my community, my society, a much better place for each and every one of you. Didn't even know you. But what I knew of was your humanity. And I loved that. And I knew that even in spite of the fact that there were people that might hate me because of the color of my skin, they might hate me because of maybe what they perceive to be my political ideologies, even though there may be people that may hate me because of my religious beliefs, that I still loved you. And I was still willing to fight for you. See, we've often heard that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. We've all agreed to that. And I believe that that's also the case in our society, that our society could only be as great as those who are most weakened by various systems. So why is that so important? See, because I really do believe that if we can figure out a way to humanize the people who are most despised in our society, the people who are most marginalized in our society, if we can figure out a way to love the convict, then we sure enough can figure out a way to love each other. And at this moment in time, this is what our country needs more of. Actually, this is what our democracy needs more of. If we can figure out a way to allow the people who've been most marginalized and despised by our society to be able to participate, if we can welcome them in, if we can beg them to come in, because we know that in order for our democracy to be vibrant, we need participation from everyone. We need it to be as inclusive as possible, and we should not rule out any other citizen of this country. And if we can figure out a way to advocate for them, then everything else becomes so much easier. You see, and Florida was that challenge. You know, because all of the experts said there's no way that you're going to re-enfranchise 1.4 million or however many people, not in Florida, not in a state as divisive as Florida, and not dealing with a topic that is so controversial, and definitely not at a time when the political climate was rife with hatred, fear, division. But that's exactly what we did. Right? We took on the most difficult task with no money. Could you imagine that? With no backing. Just ordinary people. And the difference, one of the things that I always used to stress during the campaign was I rejected being even called a bipartisan campaign. I rejected even being called a nonpartisan campaign. We were an organic grassroots movement that welcomed and enjoyed bipartisan support. And the difference is we didn't lead with the politics, we led with people. Everyday people from all walks of life, all political persuasions, and we led with the most despised of them, the so-called felons. The people that society said needed to be locked away and forever punished and labeled as a felon? Really? But those are the very same people that we used and that we centered, right, in the midst of that campaign. And we surrounded those individuals with something that we all talk about a lot, we sometimes have a hard time showing it, and that's love. That in spite of what they've done, that we love them enough to fight for them. We love them enough to be able to forgive them. We love them enough to be able to lift them up. And so we brought congregations of all faith together to say, let my people vote. And on that night in November, when we passed Amendment 4, there was some amazing things that was occurring. You know, over 5.1 million people voted yes on Amendment 4, and I tell you, over 1 million of those people were Republicans. And we were able to show the the vastness of our support for that effort, right? Think about it. Letting people with felony convictions vote, over 1 million of them, in a state like Florida that is so critical in national elections, knowing a state in which a presidential election was decided by less than 600 votes, and that every election after that was averaging around probably 100,000 votes, to all of a sudden re-enfranchise over 1 million people in such a critical state, and they should have been some type of opposition, but they weren't any. And when we looked at those 5.1 million votes, what we seen were votes that was not based on hatred or fear, but rather votes that was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption. And we actually showed the world that love can, in fact, win the day. Even when we're fighting for the most despised. And when we're talking about access to democracy, like really? Who are we to all of a sudden now be so selective to deem some citizens unworthy of participating in democracy and others more worthy? We rejected the poll taxes. We rejected the literacy test because we knew that access to democracy should be free and unencumbered. But yet we were still allowing certain policies to remain in existence. And so by creating an environment in which we have people that was fighting for the right of people to vote, and the beautiful thing about one of the beautiful things about our campaign was that we were fighting just as hard for that person who wished they could have voted for Donald Trump as we were fighting for that person that wanted to vote for President Barack Obama. Understanding that in the fight for democracy, we don't get to pick and choose who we advocate for. That if we know that we only want to advocate for certain people to be able to vote because we think they will vote like us or that they look like us, are we engaging in democracy? And we've seen that. We see it to the day, and those practices are not practices that are conducive to a healthy democracy. And so our fight to re-enfranchise people with previous felony convictions, in which we was able to shun the partisan nature or the political nature of even voting, and really connect people with the humanity of it, allowed us an opportunity to bring more people into the process to revive this democracy of ours. That humanity. It was that same humanity that I felt when I voted in my very first presidential election last year. Over 50-something years old, and it was my first presidential election. And I remember the feeling of walking in to that booth. But actually, let's go before that. Walking up to the polling location, understanding that I was walking on hallowed ground because of the blood that was shed, the sacrifices that was made for me to be able to vote. And as I walked into the voting booth and I started to look at the candidates that I had to choose from, I understood that I was engaging in a sacred act. I had a deeper, more profound appreciation for what I was getting into. I used to always say politicians needed to put a respect on my vote. I realized that day that I needed to put a respect on my vote to honor the legacy of the blood that was shed, the people who made the sacrifices. And when I went to start choosing my candidates, man, I realized that I wasn't voting as a Democrat. I wasn't voting as a Republican. I wasn't voting as an African American. I understood that what I was doing actually transcended the partisan politics and even the implicit racial biases and implications, and it took me to a place that was so pure yet powerful, a place that said that I am, that me engaging in voting actually was an affirmation of my existence and place in humanity. Within my society, that my voice mattered and it counted and it made a difference. That's what it did for me. And that's what caused so many tears to roll down my cheek, even as I exited the polling location, understanding that what I just did was more powerful than any thing I could do as a politician or anything that a political party can do. What I just engaged in was something that was so vibrant and fulfilling and affirming, and I understood why people were willing to die for it. And I understood why people who lost the right to vote had so much anxiety about regaining that right to vote and wanting to make sure that they had that opportunity before they died. And so I really do believe that just like a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and that if our society is to become greater than what it is today, that we must empower and strengthen those who are most weakened. Well, the empowering and the strengthening and creating access to democracy to people with previous felony convictions is just the pathway to take if we want our society, our democracy, to be vibrant. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Desmond, for sharing your story with us today. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. For those I don't know, I'm Jenna Spinelli, the Communication Specialist for the McCourtney Institute. We have folks watching us online right now, so we will do a bit of a blended Q&A here. If you have questions here in the room, please raise your hand, and Jenny Harchak from our team will come over with the microphone, and we'll alternate between in-person and questions from the folks watching online. A couple of other housekeeping items here. Following this Q&A, we have Webster's Bookstore and Cafe out in the lobby with copies of Desmond's books plural, for sale. His essay that was written for the Brown Democracy Medal, as well as his book, Let My People Vote. So we would encourage you to stop out there, and Desmond will also be signing books as well. So, while we're waiting for some questions to come in here, Desmond, you and I were talking this morning during a podcast interview, and you were telling me about some of the things that your organization has done in the past year or so, particularly with COVID, and how you've been working to help some of the folks that you serve. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that with us?
Yes, so thank you for bringing it back up. So, I think we're constantly engaged in a fight to prevent, I guess it's the law of inertia, right? That, when you're used to going certain ways, that you just naturally gravitate towards going that way, even though it could be staring us off a cliff. And in order for us to get to navigate safely, we're going to have some kind of tensions where we're trying to keep the car on the road where to get us where we're supposed to go. We are constantly fighting against the I guess a habit to constantly politicize everything, right? And in doing so, we have been driving home some narratives about, placing people over politics, narrative about where other people see obstacles, we see opportunities. And so in the case with Amendment 4, once we passed Amendment 4, we had a Florida legislature that came behind us, and they instituted a law that now required the payment of outstanding legal financial obligations. Everyone's screaming bloody murder. The lines have been drawn. The cases, the complaints have been filed in court, and it is on and popping. But in the middle of all of that, right, the reality is that there were real people's lives who hung in the balance. And this really impacted people like me, returning citizens who for decades have been told that they will never have a voice in this democracy. We chose to focus more on the people rather than the division. And what I would say, stumbled onto, I would love to say that I thought of it from the very beginning, but I didn't. They had the fines and fees requirement. What we did, we established a fines and fees campaign that either sought to utilize the courts to help people get their fines and fees waived, or we raised money to help pay off people's fines and fees. Once again, we believe that no person should be forced to choose between putting food on their table or being able to vote. But in the process of doing that, we raised over $27 million last year. And over 90,000 people donated. No, Mike Bloomberg did not donate that money. Right? Let me make that very clear. But over 90,000 citizens from across the country chipped in and said, we want a free democracy in Florida. And so we were able to pay off fines and fees of over 44,000 people in Florida. But what developed after that was that we realized we was doing more than just creating a more inclusive democracy for those individuals. Because by paying off those fines and fees, our organization became the one organization in the state of Florida that infused the most revenue into the state during the pandemic, where we end up saving, a couple examples, we saved jobs with public defenders, where public defenders had to publicly acknowledge that they were going to lay off a few of their attorneys because, remember, the courts was shut down and they wasn't able to generate the revenue that they typically expected to generate. and we was able to save people's jobs. We had a clerk of court in one of the counties approach their board of commissioners and say, listen, we have a $500,000 we need you to rob Peter to pay Paul. And they created a dilemma. The very next week, we arrived with a check for over $534,000. Saved taxpayers dollars as well. And so what developed, the narrative that developed was the very same people that were the most despised, right, actually became the very same people who invested the most into the state of Florida during the pandemic. Not only did we invest over $27 million into its economy, we distributed over 1 million masks throughout the entire state at homeless shelters, jails, prisons, supervisor of elections office. We distributed over 500,000 ounces of sanitizers, right? And so there's no organization that had stepped up in 2020 like Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And the beauty of it was it was led by the very same people. And so now we became the heroes, right? And now we were able to clearly demonstrate that, man, wait a minute. When you advocate for the least amount of people, everybody benefits, right? Our initial approach was, how do we get returning citizens to be able to vote again, access to democracy? And we didn't realize the other impact that it would have. And so we were actually able to clearly demonstrate that, yes, it is a benefit to everyone when you advocate for the least among them.
And folks in the YouTube chat are asking for that link. I've shared it, so I'm sure that total has ticked up and will continue to do so. Question here about the role that Black churches played in your effort. Can you share examples of what went well and how churches can help make sure that access to the vote remains in place?
Wow, churches are very critical. So let's talk about the role of the Black church for a minute. You know, one of the things, I used to organize Black churches a few years back, and I remember speaking to a bunch of pastors one time and talking to them about how during the civil rights era, Black churches was the focal point of the community, right? That you didn't just look at the Black church for salvation, but you know what? If you had a problem with your light bill, if you had a problem with the government or whatever, you had some personal issues, everybody looked to the church for information. And because of that, the church was the target of bombings, right? And I remember talking to the pastors and saying, hey, we don't have too much bombings anymore, right? So that means that obviously the Black church really have to step it up extra notch to really be that oasis of hope or whatever. In Florida, those pastors responded like never before. And during the campaign for Amendment 4, we actually ran the largest engagement of congregations of faith in this country, right? Where we had over 825 congregations of faith. And the beauty of it was not only the Black churches, but we had Latino evangelicals, the white evangelical churches. We had the Jewish synagogues. We had the Muslim, the mosque and temple, that they all came together. I mean, I think we did something amazing. We brought all of the different faith together under the same banner, and had them all agree on something, and that was that they believed in forgiveness, they believed in grace, they believed in second chances, and they led the charge about let my people vote, and it was amazing. It's important because when you talk about people that are hurt, people that are hurting in our society, and they typically would, in the past, would look at a church. We realized, I remember sitting with Michelle Alexander one day in Louisiana, and she was talking about how people who were homeless and people who had substance abuse issues was sleeping by a church, and that was a church that fed them. It was a church that clothed them. And she was like, wow, this church feeds and clothes you, right? It would seem like it would be a good church to join. And they was like, heck no. That's the last place we'll ever join. And when she asked them why, they said because that was the one place where they felt the most shame, right? And the reality is that is exactly the place where people should go who are hurting And more churches are starting to realize that and go outside and understand that it's not just about their faith, right? But it's also about how are you advocating for social justice, because all of the great religious leaders have been strong advocates of social justice.
Great. Thank you, Desmond. Who here has a question?
Leanne?
Can I just yell it out?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll repeat it.
Sorry. I'm not really good with these things anyway. So first of all, I just want to thank you so much for poignantly expressing the importance of the vote for democracy. That was really, really important, I think. And then the question I have is, in Florida, I know there have been a lot of additional voting rights laws passed in recent years. I wonder if you could just speak to how those affect returning citizens and others that you represent.
Yeah, so I see, you know, when I look at like the recent emergence of other voter suppression laws that was passed in Florida and so many other states, and we see those cycles that whenever there's an election in which some folks are not happy with the outcome, there's a slew of new legislation that's filed immediately after to curtail the vote. But I see that there's a through line, right? Because when you even talk about felony disenfranchisement, you know, we've seen this resurgence during the Reconstruction era after the people, African Americans were freed from slavery. I'm struggling with it because I know that there's a new terminology that's coming out to address the former slaves. But what you seen was, and when you broke it down, could I really break it down? You guys mind?
No.
Please, I get a pass because I have the medal, right? Okay. But let me just take you on a brief journey real quick, if you don't mind, right? And part of this is, how do we understand other sides? Because I do believe that we can't really get to places where we want to go unless we're willing to sit down with others, people that may disagree with us, and engage in some dialogue and at least put yourselves in their shoes, right? And so in this case here, I'm going back to the days of slavery and understanding, right, that we had this slave owner whose father taught him that people like me were less than human, right? That we were property, that you could treat us any way that you wanted to, that we were savages, and we were to, I mean, you have to keep your foot on our neck, and we've been brutalized. Now, his father taught him that, and his father taught him that. We're talking about multiple generations of slavery in which the African people were treated worse than animals, right? Remember this. And so all of a sudden, this guy wakes up one morning, and the federal government tells him that those people, or that property that he has, now has just as much right as he does. That's shocking right there within itself. Just imagine what you were taught growing up by your parents, who was taught by their parents, who was taught by their parents, and then somebody all of a sudden one day come and said that everything your parents and grandparents taught you, that legacy that they created, was all false. You're not going to readily accept that, right? But the scarier part was when those very same people exercised their newfound rights. And you started seeing people who were once slaves now being elected in the office. Now there's a problem, there's an adage that said it's not fun when the rabbit got the gun. I don't know if you all ever heard that before. But it reminded me when I was living in Illinois, I had a nephew. His name was Little Desmond. I was Big Desmond, he was Little Desmond. And I remember we used to play around, you know, kids, we roughhouse. I remember we were playing like cowboys and Indians one day, and I wrapped him around, tied him around a tree trunk, right? And every time he would scream, I would throw water in his face. And I remember he started crying, saying, "Big Desmond, one of these days, when you get old, I'm gonna pay you back," right? Little Desmond went away with his family because his dad was serving in the Navy. And when little Desmond came back, he was 6'4", 220 pounds, right? And I'm looking up at him. Guess what the first thing in my mind was? Man, I hope he don't remember all of that stuff, right? But that is real, the threat of retribution. We see it even today, where people are thinking that because there's now population growth of Hispanics and other ethnicities other than white, that they're threatened, right? And we must do things to nullify that threat. And so when you have a plantation that have maybe 20 slave owners and they have but 200 slaves who now have voting rights, we have to engage in tactics or techniques to diminish that voting right, because if we don't, they're going to take over and they're going to pay us back for all of the evil that we've done. It's that same mindset that we see today. That if we don't find ways to stop this new growth, or this new population, if we don't find ways to minimize them, to dehumanize them, and do it in such a way that we can get away with the atrocities that we're perpetuating or placing on these folks, then we're going to lose power, and they're going to exact retribution on us. Fear of retribution. And while to some degree it is sort of found, it's I believe that, and I think what the black folks or the black churches even back in the day that said that, we're not seeking retribution. We're not going to burn you at the stake because of what you've done to our family. Because through our experience, through the pain and suffering, what we found that was so powerful was the theory of redemption, of forgiveness. But some folks are scared that that may never happen. And so they utilize these tactics, and it's a through line. And the thing about it is that we find these things in gerrymandering. We find these things in establishing the amount of time that people get to vote, and it comes actually from both sides have taken advantage of it. And so I look at all of it holistically as an attack against democracy, and we must challenge it fiercely on both sides.
Yeah, and you know, to that point about both sides, we have a question here in the chat about, can you share some lessons that you found successful in engaging diverse groups to pass Amendment 4, particularly, you know, bringing together liberals and conservatives and different ideologies?
That we have to rethink who our enemy is. I think a lot of folks have been conditioned to believe that the enemy are those folks over there, right? And here's the deal, right? You know, I was talking to some students earlier, and we were talking about how, you know, in some homes you'll see half of it painted Auburn colors, other half, you know, Alabama colors. You know, probably up here you have some homes that are Michigan and half Ohio State, half Penn State, half Ohio State. And in spite of those differences, that you still have a family that have something stronger that binds them together, right? I believe that we have been so conditioned to believe that that person is my enemy. And so who is my enemy? You know, I had someone that I had to let my people vote shirt on that said, man, I love that shirt, right? And I could have easily just stereotyped that lady and say like, no, that's a Trumper, right? But what does a Trumper look like, right? We really don't know. And so I believe that, you know, there are ways that we can engage folks that allow people to really, a wide, diverse group of folks to really come together. I think we showed that with Amendment 4, and part of that is not allowing ourselves to follow the same old. You know, you say you do the same thing over again, expecting different results. That's what insanity. So figuring out a way how to change our language, right? Shed the labels, because when you come out with a label like, you know, you come out, this is a progressive movement, then what you did, you are automatically, you drew the lines, right? You created the opposition, right? And rather than elevating the needs of the people or the importance of the issue. And so the formula for me is looking past a person's label right? And seeing what we see first. And the first thing that I see is another human being, a child of God, before I see anything else. Right? I don't know. It could be Republicans in the audience. I don't know, and I don't care, right? Because what I see more than anything else is another human being that's worthy of being treated with dignity, respect.
Any other questions here in the room? Over here.
Hi, I don't know if this is a bit of a reach, but I was wondering if you thought if we had stronger mental health systems and invested more in mental health in the U.S. in general, would that help bolster democratic norms?
So the question for those watching online is about the connection between mental health and democratic norms.
So I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, that there is a connection. You know, mental health is something that I think just recently now is becoming a subject that people are more comfortable talking about. And I don't want to project on anyone, but I do believe that, you know, our mental state have been bruised to some degree, right? And what makes you say that? Because what I see is people hating people for no reasons, right? People being fearful of each other for really no reasons. And I think that I wouldn't say propaganda or the narrative that's been created many years ago have really bruised our mental state. And so it's when I'm thinking about mental health, I'm not just thinking about somebody that's in a crisis moment, and a lot of times that's the only thing that we associate with it. But I deal with that as well. I've suffered the traumas of incarceration, and I've suffered the traumas of racism, right? I've suffered the traumas of being brutalized, not by someone who was white, but by someone who was black, right? I've suffered through all, and so there's so much that goes into our psyche, that our mental state, that do have an impact on whether or not we want to participate in democracy, because participating, a willingness to participate in democracy, I think, comes out of an acknowledgement that we are a part of something that's bigger than us, that we are a part of society. And the people who I see that don't participate are people who are thinking that that's something other than what I'm a part of. And so I do believe that there is some kind of connection. And I hope that wasn't too much of a stretch.
No, not at all. So I have one more question for you, Desmond. I want to give the chance if there are any other questions here in the room to
So
wrap
Mr.
up.
Brown, he kind of half raised his hand there, I think.
I'm just curious, where do you go from here? What's next on the agenda?
So there are a couple of things, but one that I definitely love to talk about is this thing about change being the strongest as weakest link, right? And really finding ways to depoliticize things that, you know, shouldn't be politicized to begin with. I do believe that if we could find ways, you know, I think I was in the discussion with a professor when he talked about a driving force of democracy is love, right? Because when I think about it, and this is just my layman's approach or concept, when you talk about democracy, that we all were, just for the sake of us being human beings, were granted this unlimited power and the inalienable rights, that we have that much power. But we acquiesce or we relinquish some of that power in order for what? For us to be able to live together in a society, because we realize that we can get protections and there's a lot of benefits from that, right? And in relinquishing that power, we chose to create this form of government in which we elect people to represent our best interests, right? But at the heart of that, at the heart of all of that, is our desire to have some type of connectivity with each other, right? Today it seems like there's a strong desire to separate us, right? And so I do believe that at the heart of the fight for democracy and voting rights is our desire to be able to be in relationship with each other, in proximity of each other, and in doing so, right, we actually develop a love for each other. And when I talk about love, it's very simple for me. Love is wanting for your neighbor what you want for yourself, right? And I think about our marriages, my marriage, that I strive every day to fight, to come up with creative ways to make my wife's life a lot better, to make her feel good. Well, so I gave up my team and became an Eagle fan. I started out on the right foot. And then she wakes up every day trying to figure out ways to make me happy. And we find out that when we actually just fight for each other, everybody benefits. And so it's not about, you know, I know sometimes we turn into a society where it's about me, what can I accomplish, what fame can I get, what material things I can get. And we end up dying. You know, I got to share this quick story. I was at a Jewish funeral, and the rabbi was talking about the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea and how these two bodies of water were so drastically different, right? But they got their nutrients from the same source. And the question, how could that be? And the answer was that the Sea of Galilee had tributaries, right? So whatever blessings it received, it was able to pass on to other bodies of water. It had its own filtration system, right? While the Dead Sea was self-enclosed. So everything it received, it held on to. And it eventually became oversaturated and killed itself from within. And so even though people might seem to have a lot of stuff, right, a lot of material things, they actually are dead, void of love and joy, and they're not fun to be around. But that person that may not have everything is the life of the party, and they're just so full of love, right? And so when I think of those things, right, I think about even our democracy, our desire to want to win. That our idea is the best one, and I'm going to recruit all the people that I can get to make sure that my idea trumps everybody else's idea. Because I know the right way to fix our economy. I know the right way to deal with societal issues. And we get into this, I want my side to win, and become so consumed with winning and getting and accumulating that we end up killing ourselves, and we lose contact with our humanity. We lose contact with some core values that deep down inside we truly yearn for. And so I just think that we can reverse that. I do believe it. I believe that. But I think one of the ways of doing that is through the efforts that we're doing in Florida. And that's by getting the worst people, right, the most despised people, and lifting them up, and loving them, and humanizing them.
Well, Larry, you actually took my question. I think that is a beautiful note to end on. So everyone, please join me in thanking Desmond Meade.